So, yeah, with this highly professional thing underway, welcome to our first ever Japan Fantasy Collective Book Club interview with our author of January, David Green.
Hello.
So, for those who, for whatever reason, are joining us who did not read the book and have no idea who you are, would you mind just introducing yourself to our audience and probably my mum who's watching this?
Oh, hello, your mum. I sent a book to your mum's house. Actually, so she might know who I am.
It's true, yeah. Yeah, they've got book 2 for me, yeah.
Yes. So thanks for having me on. It was really nice to see that people, because obviously you have your group voting for what book to read as well. So it was nice. It was nice to see, and it was also for January. I was 40 in January as well, so it was a special month for me. So I'm David Green. I'm a writer. I live in Ireland. I'm Irish, but I grew up in Manchester, in the UK. But I live in Ireland again now, and I write epic fantasy and urban fantasy, both towards the darker side of things, but not grim dark. There is likable people in my books, and not too much misery, although there is a little bit of misery. But I do like grim dark, but I don't think I'd ever write it. I don't think. I need a little bit of
challenge to making sure everyone hates every one of your characters equally.
Yes, make them so hateable but compelling at the same time, which is fine. You get a couple of characters like that in your book, and it's like make them compelling and but it's a real challenge to do it for every single character that you come across, I think. But I need a little bit of hope in my stuff as well. Like just for me when I'm writing it, I can't wallow in misery for that long.
Right, I've got to kill all these guys. I don't want to, but I've got to now because they're so terrible.
I've got to just spread just horribleness everywhere all the time.
Yeah.
Never say never. Maybe when I'm a little bit older and just a little bit more cynical, I'll just be like, you know what, grimdark is the genre for me.
Because not to jump too far ahead, but you're releasing the last part of this series this year.
Yeah. So book 2 is already out, which is a fair bit darker than in Solitude Shadow, just because it's called Path of War. So it's it kind of has to that's the kind of theme in it is a lot about the effects of warfare and what have you, and obviously where the first book finishes off, it's quite a precarious situation for a lot of people. So the second one's already out. The third one is coming out the first week of April, which is called Beyond Sundered Seas, and then the fourth one, which is going to be the final one, is out in September. Okay. And I just started writing that one now, so it's going to be quite a tight one, but I want to have it finished this year. So yeah.
You do well with self-imposed deadlines, or do you hate
them? Yeah. I prefer them, to be honest with you. I'd spend too much time world building if I didn't have a deadline. So when I have a dedeadline, it means I have to do this. I have goals that I need to do and everything like that. And it works well. I do ghost writing for other people as well, and they have so obviously that's all deadline led. So it's good. So I'm able just to do this amount. I have to do this amount of words every time I sit down. Then just do it, and then I'm free to do whatever else I want to do that day.
Nice. So actually, it just made me realize we haven't actually shown people the book we're talking about today. So we will be talking to David. I say we in the royal we sense. I'm going to be talking to David about book 1, Solitude's Shadow, which was our book of the month for January. If you're joining us later than that. So obviously we all had a read of it. We had a meeting where we discussed it in a very formal fashion. I want to make it sound as highbrow as possible. We all sip tea and discuss. No, none of that happened.
It was like the fancy club in the office.
Yeah. One of the guys was in a pub while we were talking about it, so he was definitely not drinking tea.
Excellent.
Yeah, that's sort of the level we're generally at. But it was good. It's good. We all enjoyed it, which is what you want to do, right?
Drinking beer and talking about books is great. What? Any alcohol, not just beer.
Yeah, we're accepting of all the alcohols in our book.
Exactly.
When we're not elitist like that.
Yes.
Yeah. But no, so I mean, yeah, the good news for you is obviously we overwhelmingly, genuinely enjoyed the book. A couple of people already said they've got book 2 like ordered by the time they were talking about it, so that's got to be good, right?
It is. I mean, that's the thing with it. When you kind of like, well, it's great to be like kind of. It's like being nominated for an award or something. It's kind of like, well, people are going to read this now, and they may not like it, and that's fine. I mean, this was the first book that I wrote as well, and there's I think it sets up the world quite nicely, and I like a lot of the character work in it. And would I do things differently with it now? Yeah, and I'd probably write it in a little bit of a different way. I think the story would remain the same for the most part, but I'd certainly kind of write it in a different way, because I've been writing for longer now, and I've written more books and all that. But you have to start somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And
annoying that, right?
Yeah, that's it. Like, you can't just come out straight out of the gate. Well, some people do, I guess. Some people do come out with like masterpieces straight out of the gate, but they've generally been working on them for quite a long time. So yeah, you got to start somewhere, and it's like I think it's a good starting point for the world. And then it was kind of written as a novella, a fantasy novella, to try and get people introduced to like this world and these characters, and see it, and basically say, if you like this, there's more to come, and it's going to be more in depth and bigger and what have you, and the scope is going to widen out. But it was one of those, as a new author, and especially in the fantasy realm and doing epic fantasy, it's kind of like, would people kind of take the risk on like a 200,000 word book from someone they don't know, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of kind of ideas like that going into it, and obviously I was quite inexperienced as well, so which I think shows like in the rest of the series, because like book 2 is twice the size of Solitude Shadow, and then book 3 is it's about 230,000 words now, so it's like 4 times the size of Solitude Shadow.
You preempted one of our questions, because someone did ask about the fact that book 2 is double the size of book 1.
Yeah.
What happened with that? But okay, so this was.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can answer that now, like, if you want. The basically the reason is for that is just because the first book was, as I say, it was kind of an introductory, but it has a very defined time scale on it, because there's an instant that's going to happen, and it's kind of ticking down to that, and it's like all of the characters are all kind of caught up with this thing, so it's like, it's how many different adventures can they go on before they get to this place for this thing to go, like, it kind of would stretch kind of belief a little bit. Again, like, going back to it as more experience now, I could start the story a little bit earlier. I could do other things now, like which I could have done, like, but that was basically the reason. It was because it was this thing where I wanted to kind of keep the pace, and it was one of those things where it was like, can we do epic fantasy at a shorter page count than what is standard for epic fantasy? When it came then to book 2, I'd written another book in between, which was my urban fantasy one. I'd written a couple of ghostwriter books as well, so I was a bit more experienced, and it was like, I wanted there was more storylines. I wanted to kind of widen out the conflict a little bit, and kind of examine different facets. And once you start adding the extra POVs, the books get longer, right? They get bigger and bigger. And this one is it's a more complicated book as well, like the second one, because in terms of like themes and stuff like that, there's a lot more going on with like because we touch on it in the first one in Solitude Shadow. Is like even the good characters are working for this immorally bankrupt empire, and they're all complicit. Even Colleen, like who is like the probably the main protagonist, is and she's a good person, but she is complicit in this genocide that they're carrying out. And even like Cade, who like has this like kind of romantic notion about where his son came from this relationship that he was in, that was like, you know, a doomed relationship essentially, but also he was a person of power with someone who wasn't a person of power, and that sort of stuff. So when you get into the second book, this kind of stuff gets more explored. So he needs to kind of, and the quite kind of heavy themes, like, you know, like how does being complicit in something like that, what does that mean, and power that people have over other people, and what does that mean as well, like, you know. And so there's a lot of that kind of stuff that's explored in it. So it was naturally going to be a longer book, and it was always planned that way. The third book, the reason why that one, just to preempt this one, is the reason that one got so long was because there's actually less POVs, different POVs in the third one, but I made the wonderful decision to go to a different part of the world completely. So when you go to a different part of the world, you have to just be like, you can't just be like, they're here, this is the, and they're going again. It has to be like, this is how this place works, this is the culture, this is this, this is this, this is this. And also I decided that it would be that in the way that my world works, there would be the character that would have the most challenging time to actually be able to get a boat and a crew to go to a different continent was the one that had to do it. So it wasn't that kind of thing where it's like they can just go and buy a boat and get a crew. It was like, well, you know, we have to figure this out. So it was like, so yeah, it's you know, it is epic fantasy, and I think so long answer. But like when I thought, like, can you do epic fantasy in a shorter page count? You can to an extent, but I think if it's part of the series, then it goes away quite quickly. And I think even if you look at like more classic stuff, like even like the Belgariad, for example, which, like, you know, are kind of like shorter epic fantasy books, but they're still like, even the shortest is still 300 pages long, and like, you know, even by the fifth book in each series, it's pushing like 400, 420 and stuff like that, and they're kind of shorter epic fantasy. So I think it's one of those things that once you start getting into the meat of the series, it's going to expand a little bit.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of writers have that thing where, you know, the first book is maybe sort of 200, 250 pages, and then just the experience of writing, you sort of realize how you can kind of get more into it and expand things, and then suddenly you hit 300 and then 400, and that, you know, you're writing 2,000 page books and you don't know what to do with them.
Yeah, and you learn a lot of lessons from it, because, like, I mean, I've enjoyed it, and I'm really looking forward to getting stuck into the final book now, which I think is going to be a bit more straightforward. It won't be as short as Solitude, but it won't be as long as definitely not the third book. It'll probably be about the same length as Path of War, because again, there's a definitive thing to it. Like, you know, there has to be this end point that they're all working to. But, you know, if I went back to do epic fantasy again in the future, I'd probably look at doing, like, I'd definitely do less POVs, maybe. I'd say maybe now. I'd say definitely and then maybe straight away. And also definitely maybe, probably, and now I'm adding a probably, not go to a different continent halfway through the series, but you never know.
Yes, it's good that you haven't committed to this. So, you know, people can't come back to this video later on and be like, well, you said definitely, but you got the maybe and the probably, so you're safe.
Straight away, just qualify it straight away. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So for our next question, kind of coming off from what we talked about earlier with the relationships. So yeah, probably I think one of the most commented on things that people actually really enjoyed reading about was the way you built the relationships between the different characters. Like, I think that's definitely one of the strengths of the books. Mm-hmm. Did you have any sort of direct inspiration for any of those characters when you were writing that?
Yeah, like some of them was ones that, like, you know, from my own kind of life experience, I suppose. And then some of them were ones that I was like, you know, I'd like to have seen this myself as a reader. So like Colleen and Zana's relationship was definitely one of those where it was, you know, you see a lot of like characters that always have daddy issues, basically, and it's like, and that is the one. So I was like, you know what, mummy issues would be good, but then also to turn that around as well and have like the daughter issues. Right?
Yeah.
It's not, and have that kind of thing. And I'd recently become a parent as well, so I have a 5-year-old son now. So when I was writing this, he would have been 2, and so that's where like Cade and Arlo kind of come into that as well, which was a lot more kind of relatable for me for being like identify as a male and having a father and everything like that, and and having a son, so I can kind of see that, and that's where that kind of whole central thing between Zana and Colleen came from as well. It's like the choices that parents make for their children, and because I can think of things that like my parents' decisions that they made for me, which at the time I was like, how dare you, right, and or whatever, and resented them and whatever, and everyone can associate with that. But when you become a parent, you find yourself making those same decisions, and it's a different thing, right? And it's interesting between Kana and Colleen and Zana, because you get it's pretty much 50-50 that split from people that come to me and say who they agree with the incident of what happens, and you see a lot more of that in Path of War. We revisit, that's a major plot point. And it's funny because like it's usually 50-50 because it's normally people that don't have children agree with Colleen, and people that have children agree with Zana, right? And I very much agree with Zana on it, because there's nothing I wouldn't do for my child, and if I found them in that kind of situation in this magical world that they're in, probably would have reacted in the same way. It's just like it's an instinct. But it's one of those things that, like, if you don't have children, and you'll know this now, being a new parent yourself, like something changes inside of you. Like there's something that's just different to how you were, even when you knew the child was coming. When they're actually physically here, there's something different. It changes, and there's like there's something even like kind of feral inside of you. There's like when you're here, like. I don't know if this has happened to you yet, but if you're somewhere and then you hear your child like in the distance crying, and it's kind of like you're like, what? It's like you're holding in on it
around.
Yeah. Anything could be going on, and you can just pick it out of like 1,000 different sounds, and you just it's, your instinct is to go there, right? So that was like something that if I'd started writing this book 6 years ago, it wouldn't have been the same. Like I wouldn't have understood that, and I personally would have probably agreed with Colleen at the time. But hopefully in the book it doesn't come across that way, that I actually have a choice, that I have a preference, because I like to try and keep it so it's like, if you agree, that's fine. That's fine. Then the other kind of relationship that I kind of like a lot in that is the Vettigan and Colleen relationship. And Vettigan is like I was very, very close to my granddad, who was basically my father figure, like, and I spent a lot of time with him. So like I do enjoy having like grandparent age characters in my books, and they're always treated, I'd say, with fondness from the character. Obviously some things happen to Vettigan that aren't great, but that's because it's like you want to challenge your characters as well. But I really enjoyed that aspect of their relationship, and I sometimes like find myself wondering what did they do in that 10 years, like where they were just off on adventures and going around the hinterlands and drinking in taverns and all this kind of stuff. I just wonder what Vettigan trying to get Colleen a girlfriend and stuff like this, and failing. Yeah. Maybe one day I might do a little story with the two of them, because that's probably like the relationship I enjoy the most in the books is theirs. So even though I just do terrible things,
That's the life of an author,
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I like this character. Now your life will suffer.
That's right. Yeah, and like Cade is probably the one who's closest to me in terms of personality and stuff. There's obviously a few differences here and there and everything like that, but like he is like the one that kind of I can write the easiest. Like his thought process is closest to mine, and I am brutal to him. I just unrelentlessly just torture that guy. So don't know what that says about me really. It's probably something I probably need to talk to a therapist.
Yeah. Well, fair enough. Fair enough. Our next one's actually more about solitude itself. So there was a little bit of hypothesizing, can say the word, about the fact that obviously you're living in Ireland, the UK as well, being quite nearby. You know, there's castles just dotted all over the place. Was there any like specific inspiration from anything you'd been to that kind of helped you with solitude, or was it just a kind of an amalgam of?
Yeah, a couple of things. Yeah, so Hadrian's Wall was one of them, which is obviously, and this is what there is like a few people that kind of say you must like Game of Thrones. I actually don't. I like the TV series well enough; it was fine, and the books I don't really like at all. I just the too slow, not slow. I don't know. There's just something about them that I just could never really get into. But
angry Game of Thrones fans commenting on here now.
Yeah, I know. Well, there's some. I mean, I liked the first one, Game of Thrones, and I just think I think the Clash of Kings is the best, and it's been kind of diminishing returns since then. But it's not a huge influence on me anyway. But the wall in Game of Thrones is based on Hadrian's Wall as well, right? And like the whole conflict of Game of Thrones, of Song of Ice and Fire, is basically the War of the Roses with dragons, right? And you know, and that's one of those things. It's one of those inescapable things. Like, you know, from my background, I grew up in the north of England. I was like a 30-minute train ride away from North Wales, which is full of castles, and I was, 30-minute train ride away from York, which is full of castles, and 20 minutes away from Chester, which is an old Roman town. It's a walled town, and I live in Athenry, which has got a castle like literally 2 minutes down the road. I can see it from if I look out of my window, I can see this castle. So, you know, it's one of those things that I kind of like, you grow up around. What I tried to do as well was in terms of, and this comes through, I think, a lot more in the second book, but in terms of like how characters are described and the dress and the food that they have, it's a very kind of southern Mediterranean outlook as well. It wasn't, I tried to get away from that kind of like Northern Europe kind of thing as well, where I could. But yeah, so that was that was one of the things. So like Hadrian's Wall was one of those things, and it was mostly the thing that mostly inspired. There's two things that kind of inspired the whole kind of setup of the world, how it is, and solitude, and that was there's three things. So one of them is the game Dragon Age, which was a big inspiration because I really love that world, and the story in it is great, and just the whole kind of, it was the first fantasy thing that I can really remember seeing and experiencing where there was like this certain like well-trod fantasy races were treated in a very, very different way. And there's almost like a xenophobia between different races, which I'd never really come across before. There's elements of it, obviously, even in Tolkien, where there's like this trust between like dwarves and elves, but there's no like outright like xenophobia or something like there was in Dragon Age. The other thing then was Brexit, which was happening as COVID started. So actually there was four influences, because COVID obviously was one of them as well, because COVID was happening when I was writing this book, the first lockdown. But Brexit was another one. So I was like, that was happening across the water, and it was kind of mad, and it's still kind of mad, and it's kind of just crazy. But that was like a huge influence as well. Then the fourth influence was just the so it was COVID, Dragon Age, Brexit, and that was pretty much it. I think that was the main influences of those kind of things, and then that kind of came then into this place of like solitude, of this place where it's like, you know, the last kind of bastion against this unknown, and then we're in this world of like kind of, it's quite progressive in some ways, like that their interpersonal thing is quite progressive, like, you know, that there's no like no one bats an eyelid at anyone's kind of sexuality or human race, skin color, and everything like that. Everyone is happy, everyone's good with that. But then if you're from somewhere else, they're very like, hang on, you're not from this place, and this, and that was something that interested me, and like, the whole rewriting of history and not kind of taking lessons from the past, which was all tied up with this like Brexit kind of thing, it's a funny one. I tend not to, when people kind of do mention the Game of Thrones thing, I tend not to just like talk, like kind of like disagree with them, because obviously it's a big series to kind of to say, like, if you like Game of Thrones, you might like this, but
Right.
It was actually one of the very, very far back in terms of influences on me. It's just one of those things where it's like there's a common influence between the two series.
Yeah, it's hard not to get compared to Game of Thrones if you got a massive wall going north in your book.
Exactly.
These days, just jump straight to that, I guess. But
yeah, and exactly, and it was one of those things as well. And I think I've never really researched that series all that much, other than like the things that I know about it. But one of the reasons why I put the threat to be in the, and it's not really, we find more about what this threat is anyway, and the threat is more something that comes from inside, how belt as it is. But the reason that I was like put the threat in the north was because like I'm sick of having like that thing. The threat comes from the east, or the threat comes from here, or you know what I mean. So I was like, the north is like, and I wonder if he did the same thing, where it's like, this like, let's do something other than like east and west, east versus west. Let's have like north versus south, right? And obviously when you do like the south, there's this kind of, you get this thing where it's the American Civil War, so you want to kind of avoid that if you can. So it kind of leaves you with the North, but it's like, well, we'll stay at the North then, and then obviously then you kind of have that thing. So, but I do kind of try and get away from that, as I was conscious of it, that there would be parallels with it when I was kind of writing it, but obviously I kind of do my own thing where it's like it's very, very quickly resolved. Should we say?
No, fair enough. This gets good. Then, yeah, you mentioned before, obviously, Kane was like your sort of the easiest one to write. Are there any characters you found difficult to write in this series, in this book?
Zana was quite difficult, just to kind of get the emotion right for her. So in my first couple of drafts, the character was there and the story was there. There was no real changes. But when I went to like kind of after it got, because this is like this is published by a small independent press, so when it got picked up by them, we went through the character developments. That was one that kept on coming up. Was like, how is she feeling about this? How is what is, drill more into this character, because their relationship is like the emotional kind of center of the book, so it has to work. And it was a challenge to write it, because obviously, like, Cade was a lot easier, and other characters were a lot easier. But like, she is in a very particular kind of place, and she has a very particular kind of relationship, and their dynamic is something that I've not experienced, right? So it's, I've experienced different dynamics. So it's kind of getting those two to work as a relationship between women, and a very conflicted relationship between women, where they're apart for most of the story as well. And kind of getting that to work was very, very, very tricky. Yeah, I think you did the work for it, and I think hopefully it's my son just running past there. Hopefully it paid off, and because I think Zana seems to be a character that quite a lot of people like, and I like her as well. And when I've gone back to write anything about her, it's been a lot easier since the first time. But the first one, it took a while to get get that right.
Nice. Then going back, actually, so you talked about a little bit the elves before. Why did you go with elves? So like, there's a lot of classical fantasy races, but obviously in book one, at least, I don't know if anything comes later on. It seems to be just elves.
Yeah, it is. It is just. It is just elves. There is no other fantastical creatures in this world that we know of yet. Maybe there's other parts of the world that we haven't explored, and we won't explore in this kind of story. Yeah. So what was it? It was that thing that was just basically taking something that was. Sorry, one sec. I will be back just 1 second.
Yeah,
my son is
no
calling you. So 1 second.
Don't worry.
Yeah, so the elves. So yeah, yeah, it was one of those things. Like I'm a big like fantasy fan, like, and I'm a big classic fantasy fan as well. You know, and I mean, I have like a Lord of the Rings tattoo. I can see if you can get Gandalf's rune there, and I have like, I have like Led Zeppelin tattoos, which are like kind of like Tolkien-esque and everything. Like I'm a huge like fan of Tolkien. So like the first thing I was going to write was probably always going to have, like, fancy wise, was probably always going to have elves in it at some point, like, but what I wanted to do is, like, again, like that kind of where the Dragon Age influence comes in, was that do something different with them. And what I wanted to do with them, and obviously this gets explored a lot more in the later books. They become with Brina, the character Brina being kind of like a big part of that, is we kind of explore. They're tied quite like thematically to what's going on with the whole world and the story of something that was once like, when you think of elves in most other fantasy, they're this kind of, they can be warriors and they can be this, but usually they're very kind of like held in high regard, and they have like this kind of, not innocence but purity, I suppose would be the better way of kind of doing it. And I wanted to kind of take this thing that was like a shadow of its former self, and they've been forced that way through like the way they've been treated. They've been forced to kind of change their nature and react in certain ways, and they've been kind of pushed to the very, very edges of society and what have you. And that is kind of reflected in the way the magic system is being used in this series as well, and just the world in general. And it was so I thought they were the perfect kind of classic fantasy race to do that, because like when you it stood out so much to me, like in Dragon Age, like over 20 years ago now, when that came out, close to 20 years ago, is that when you see like these beautiful creatures being treated in such a way, it's kind of shocking, and it's you're like, how, why would you do that for something that's like supposed to be like living in nature and loving trees, and you love the moon and the stars and all this kind of stuff, and they've been forced to become almost these like animalistic survivors, right? And so that was something that I kind of wanted to do with them, and just kind of use them as like, they have their own thing going on as well, like, and that get explored more in the other books. But yeah, I kind of just wanted to do that and use them to explore like some of the things that I wanted to kind of explore in the book, and I thought they were the perfect creature. Because if you use dwarves or something like that, you'd be like, well, you'd expect that from dwarves. Like they would be like, they live in grimy places a lot of the time. Sure. And you could always obviously make up your own kind of race as well to do the same thing with, but again, it's one of those things where you're kind of getting readers in straight away. You want to kind of use a little bit of shorthand sometimes. So it's like you say, well, people know what that is, and it's like, this is how we're going to treat them differently in this book. And then it's like, okay, well, all right, I understand that. Whereas if it's like a completely new race, then there's more like things that you have to do to kind of establish everything and establish the reason why.
You got the word elf in, and everyone's like, right, it's this.
Yeah, exactly. Like, say elf, and it's like a tall, statuesque, beautiful, creature that loves nature and like, they're good at certain things and all this kind of stuff. Like, if it was like I don't know, like I don't know what's to make up a word, like a hoovlin, right? If it's like, these hoovlins are being treated very badly, you'd be like, well, what's a hoovlin? And it's like, well, this is it. Why should I care about why this hoovlin is being treated like this? And you have to go.
Especially if you then go on to describe an elf, and it's like, well, why'd you call it that?
right. And that's that thing with the whole like Robert Jordan thing. I'm a big Wheel of Time fan, but it's the thing with like Trollocs. It's like, look, they're basically orcs, right? But they're kind of like, they have the orcs with like animal features. It's like, it's the same thing, right? It's just one of those things, and it depends. Like, you can commit to it and go for it, or you can just go with that. And that, yeah, I like series that kind of make up their own creatures as well. But like, it's one of those things that's like, with what we were trying to do with this one, and as well, like the publisher that picked it up, they were wanting fantasy novellas at the time. They weren't wanting longer ones, so it had to be written as novella length. It was one of those things where it's like, do I use the page count or the word count to establish a new thing altogether, or can I do it this way? Which is funny, because then obviously after this one, I was like, well, none of them are going to be novellas after this. So, and they were fine, but they were okay.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. For the time and the space, you don't want to be, spending a book just describing something that could just easily be slotted in when you don't have to.
Yeah, I mean,
that.
Yeah, I'll do that another time. I've got something that I'm kind of working on that I'm going to be doing a lot more of my own kind of like things with, but it's not going to be epic fantasy either. So it's going to be fantasy, but not epic fantasy. So it's there's different expectations with that. You can just be like, here is the Hoovlands. They look like this, and this is what they like, and that's great.
Yeah, I guess it's the epic tag that really sort of leads people into where are your dwarves and elves and
right
things like that. Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Then kind of again sort of follows on from the elves and their kind of role in the book. So one of the other kind of major themes I thought in the story that you cover is sort of the elements of how nature balances into things, and how there's a real danger of drawing too much power that you either beyond what you can control or beyond what you need. And there's a lot of emphasis on that, finding a balance with things. Why did you kind of go with that as one of the core themes of the story?
Yeah, there's a few reasons for that, and it's one of those things that kind of is a major thing for the books that follow on from it. I just think maybe that's kind of like one of my own kind of like worldviews coming into it a little bit. Whereas I think like we live on this planet, right? And we're just a part of this of this like a circle of life, as Mustafa once said. And we're just a part of this place like everyone else is, and only because like we're like the dominant species and everything doesn't mean that we shouldn't treat the rest of the world and everything in it with respect. And I think you go too far with things, and certain things are going to happen. There's going to be consequences from that. And I wanted to kind of get that across again, and in a way that like some people don't agree with that kind of point of view, and that's fine. They don't agree with some of the things that I would believe in, and what have you, and I wouldn't believe in some of the things that they believe in. That's great. And so you don't want to kind of do it in a very, very preachy way, because you don't want to make like you don't want to turn it into like this kind of thing where it's like this is too much like the real world, like because you're reading it for escapism, but then so it's like, well, I want to put this theme as part of the magic system and the world itself, because as the books go on, you realize that the magic system is a living thing, right? It's part of this world, and it's like it's I don't do it so much in the first book, but in the second book, there's a bit where like a character refers to himself a couple of times as like a dog treated badly, and I'm one of these people where I'm like, there is no such thing as a bad breed of dog, right? All dogs are just like people; they're the same. It's how you treat them, right? And you treat a dog in a certain kind of way, and it can become violent, it can become vicious, and they do that to protect themselves. And that's the kind of way that I kind of look at that with the magic system as well, and other things. And it's about, so that's why it comes with balance, because again, it's one of those things where it's like with Zana, with the choice that she does a vicious action, but does she do it for the wrong reasons, or does she do it for the right reasons, right? And is it okay that how that she did that? Was it the right thing to do? I would say yes, it was, right. She used magic in a bad way, in a violent way, but what was the alternative in that situation, right? Whereas, like, could you use magic in a good way and get a bad situation from it? Could you be too passive about something? So that's why you're kind of coming across where it's like there's this balance between it all, where it's like, and again, it gets explored further in the other books, but like inherently, it's like the things that the tool isn't inherently good or evil. It's the choices that are made that are the things that are good or evil. Like, that it's a tool at the end of the day, or it's a living thing that can be treated in a certain way, like a puppy. Like, you could get like one of these an American pit bull, which like people say they're a violent breed. It's like, well, people get them and they train them and they use them to be violent. That's why you get an American pit bull puppy, and yeah, it'll have its characteristics. It might be boisterous, it might be this, but if you treat it with love and care and you choose this way, it'll grow up like a different one that's treated in a way to fight other dogs. And so that was like something that I kind of wanted to kind of explore. And like, yeah, I've seen people kind of look at it and say like, I had a couple of 1-star reviews saying that was quite woke and too political and what have you, and that's fine. But it was more of for me, it was less of a political thing and more of a humanitarian thing of looking at like, look, it's about choice. And it's about what we decide to do with things, which is the most important thing. And that is something that the characters that are in it will ties in well, that kind of complicity thing as well, like how complicit are we? We're choosing to do this and to be a part of this. We could have walked away at any point, and you find out more. That gets more explored in the second book. You do come across some. It's hinted at in the first one a little bit, where like Garrett at Solitude is saying about how like sparkers disappear sometimes, and like they go off and what have you. So you do come across some that have walked away from it all and what they're choosing to do. And then the magic system, like where these kind of shadow sparkers, the effect that these shadow sparkers are having on this magic system gets explored quite a lot as well.
Nice. Because I think maybe just because I grew up reading Pratchett, but personally, I've always equated fantasy with having some element of the author's kind of personal philosophy or politics built into it as standard.
Yeah, I think generally they do. Yeah, I think generally they do. Like, I mean, again, you look at Tolkien, like, and people like say, well, fantasy wasn't political back then. They did put their own kind of spin on things. They're like, are you sure? Like, he wasn't one for allegory, but like, it's pretty much like the whole book is pretty much a lament about technology destroying the natural world. Like, the whole of his legendarium is right. So it's always been there. But it's just people just choose to ignore it sometimes if it's something they don't agree with and it's small enough they can brush past it. But it's like all the Star Wars people where they say Star Wars never used to be political. It's like Star Wars is about the
They're literally called stormtroopers. That's why I'm going to say on it. Like,
like the Emperor was based on Richard Nixon, right? It's like it's always been political. There's no two ways about it, but people just tend to believe they're not. Yeah,
so it's good. We've angered the Game of Thrones fans. Star Wars.
I just think it's one of those things. I just think it's like you can. The good way of doing it is like you elevate the story and you elevate the world and the characters to do what you want. And if you want to have those things that are underneath it, that's great. It makes the world all the richer. and it gives people things to kind of really delve into and discuss. And I do agree with people that sometimes that say where, well, it's too much of the real, but it can be too heavy-handed sometimes. I do agree with that, because at the end of the day, like, you are. I could go and read an essay about these things, right? If I wanted to, or a non-fiction book. But I think it is also like, it is naive to think that there is no other things going on in a lot of these books, right? Because it's hard not to. How can you not put your own? You can come down. You can try not to come down on one side and show different POVs. Like, so that's why I go off, and especially in the second book, we spend a lot of time with like Emperor Locke and Nexes, and we see things from their point of view and see the reasons why they're doing the things they're doing and why they think they're correct to do them. But it's still there in the book, right? It's still there as like, this thing's still going to be a resolution.
I guess a lot of people have the issue where it's very sort of strawmanned into a book, where it's very obvious, like, this is the ideal point of view, and here's the opposing guy, he sucks. There's not much.
Yeah.
But no, I think you've managed to avoid doing that, so you can rest easy on that one. Yeah, so far. Still got those chances.
Wait till book 4. It'll be a woke fest. It's going to be amazing.
Nice. Go woke, go broke. So you got.
That's what. No, it's going to be. I don't know. Who knows? It's one of those things. It's just, again, a balance, isn't it? You want to tell a story, and you want to have the themes that are in it, but you want to do it in a way that's like, you're not preaching at people and trying to. You don't want to upset anyone, even people you disagree with, and if they have views that are different from yours, but they're not harming people, then that's life, right?
Yeah, fair enough. Very much is life. Actually, yeah, you mentioned the Shadow Sparkers, so like those guys, like they're pretty creepy. So good job with that. Like, what was your influence for those guys?
This is another one where this gets developed in the second one quite a lot, and there is a very, very specific influence on this, which would signal my political leanings, but people haven't actually noticed that. Haven't actually asked me about it yet, so I'm not going to say until, like, maybe you'll come back and read the second book and we can talk about it then. It's kind of flown under the radar a little bit, which I was quite pleased with, because I was like, this may be too apparent of what this actually is a stand-in for, but it wasn't. so that's good. But yeah, so again, like the Shadow Sparkers is basically like, this thing of balance going too far in one direction, right? And they're using this thing which they think is a tool to do. It's like, that analogy of the dog, like, just the corrupted this thing and it's just become vicious. And what they're starting to realize is that maybe this thing has its own goals and desires. Maybe it isn't a tool. Maybe there's something else going on here, and we've kind of awakened this thing. And it's having like this, and that was what I was trying to get across with that thing, like where they think they've killed one of them, and it comes back. It's like the body is dead, but the thing inside them is still craving. To be used, basically, and to corrupt, and it's they're interesting, and they're part of like the disease, the infestation of Houtvale. It's like a very kind of like a very noticeable symptom of what is happening in this nation, and it's something that gets explored a lot more, and there's more to it, where like can Spark users be turned this way? Can they be forced to have this thing inside of them, and what happens to them over a certain amount of time, and what happens when more and more people start to turn to this darkness, and they're an interesting thing. So that was one of those things where it's like, it's a good visual representation of what is of what is happening, and also it's a new threat level, right? Because
Mm.
I'm a big believer of like if you bring in something that has like a certain power level, you have to bring in the answer on the other side of it. You know, you can't have just like completely overpowered characters all of the time. Which, you know, I've read things and watched things where that becomes an issue, and the issue of that is that this character is too powerful. How do we sideline them for this story, because they could just appear like Pug from Rift War series, from Rift Nephi Sons, and Thomas. They were both like after the first book, it was like, well, we need to put these aside somewhere. We need to trap them in some dimension for a little while because they could just appear and fix everything. So you have to have that kind of, you know, you have a shadow, you have a sparker, you have to have a shadow sparker that can like defeat what's their weakness, what's their strength, and vice versa. And you have this, and you have this, and there is always that escalation then. But as long as there's logical escalation, then it's okay. So that was one of those things where it's like, what can we do to for action, but also for like the kind of moral kind of thing, is it as well as like, you know, it's the opposite of what a sparker should be. And then this balance thing, and this is a thing that kind of comes again a lot, and it's going to be explored a lot in the fourth book actually, is like you have this aspect of balance. Like, so you have the shadow sparkers as being like the very, very far side of something that is very, very bad. But then what's the problem if you go too far the other way as well? What if you become too good, right? Can everything be good all of the time? Don't think so. There needs to be a little bit of darkness as well. So yeah, that's going to be something where it kind of goes in the future.
Interesting. Nice.
Yeah.
And then I got one more question, maybe the most important question, which is which of your characters do you think would be most proficient at knitting a scarf?
Oh, best at knitting a scarf. I actually think Vetigan would be.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Vetigan would be the best, isn't it, in the scarf? I think, you know, he's an older guy. You know, he's been around for a while. He likes sitting beside fires quite a lot and like having a nice little a cup of wine, listening to some lute players, thinking about better times. And yeah, I think I could definitely see him knitting all sorts of things, not just scarves. I think he'd be maybe not by the end of Solitude Shadow he would be very good at it, but definitely before that time.
Scarf. Yeah.
he'd be knitting some horrific looking things by the end of that, like very just. But yeah, prior to In Solitude Shadow, I could, you know what, I might actually, if I go back and write a little story about Colleen and Vetigan, I might just have him, just for you, I just might have him knit a scarf for Colleen to wear somewhere or something. But yeah, I think I could definitely see him knitting quite a lot of stuff.
Fantastic. Well, there we go. So I'm gonna have to pick up that book when you write it. No pressure.
Yes. You know what? I might just write it just for you and just send it through to you.
I appreciate that. I mean, I like the message you put in the book when you sent it over to me, because obviously we do have the best name.
That's true.
Yeah.
That is true.
Yeah, it's the gift that keeps on giving. I get a little short story just for me. Vetigan and his scarf. Nice.
Vetigan and the scarf, yeah. The ideas are just blue. They're just firing in my head. Like it's
yeah. Well, write it before someone else does, you know. That fan fiction, it could happen.
You know what? I would love that. I would love fan fiction about people knitting stuff, just or whatever it is. My alpha read, one of my alpha readers for when they're reading book 3 was like, I have to go. There's a certain relationship in that really fired their imagination, and they're like, I have to write fan fiction about this. Right. It's like you've gone in a direction which I knew you had to go, but I want this to be different. And I was like, that's fine, you go and write it.
But now you know you've made it as an author. You've got people writing fan fiction for you. Like,
I know, yeah. Smutty fan fiction about shipping characters that have
the next level.
Yeah, man, they have no right to. They shouldn't be together, nowhere near each other, in that kind of way. But like they're being shipped already, and it's like, well, I guess that's one more string to my bow.
Yeah, nice. And then I guess that brings us to your most anticipated point, where for people who haven't read the book yet, if you'd like to give us your pitch.
So yeah, so yeah, if you've not read In Solitude Shadow yet, it's basically the entry level of an epic fantasy adventure that is a little bit Dragon Age, a little bit Game of Thrones, and a lot of new stuff about morality and great characters with really good, strong female characters as well. And lots of representation, which I'm very, very proud of. And it's fast paced, it's a bit of fun, it's a little bit dark, but there's a little bit of hope in it as well. So you can check that out in Solitude Shadow. Best place to find me and all my stuff is my website, which is davidgreenwriter.com. And you can find everything about me and where I might be right there.
Nice. And assuming I can work out how to do it, there'll also be a link for all that stuff in the video when it goes on YouTube. But we'll see how that works out. Hopefully there'll be links in descriptions and things. That's what people say, right? Check out the description for links. I know what I'm doing.
We'll figure it out. It's fine.
Yeah, it'll be fine. Hopefully there's a lot more of these to come, so it'll just become a well-oiled machine of me not having to get a phone charger halfway through, and
my son running off and having an accident.
It'd be very impressive if your son features in future interviews with other people.
He'd love that. He loves the limelight.
Well, he knows. We'll see what we can work out then.
He's just appeared there because he knows we're talking about him.
Nice. So. No, well, thank you very much for your time and chatting about the stuff. It's been really good.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me. And thanks for everyone in the book club for reading it as well. Hope you enjoyed it.
We did. No, very much so. Like there was zero overly negative comments. So except for the stuff I wrote. But aside from
that. Yeah. I can live with some negative comments, but overly negative ones make me cry.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Hopefully get you on in the future when we get maybe into some other books, because obviously you have other series for us to read as well. So
I do have urban fantasy series there's gonna a few of them out this year actually. There's only one book out at the moment, which is The Devil Walks in Blood. But I think that there's gonna be 3 books out for that series this year, a prequel and 2 sequels. And that one is basically Dresden meets Supernatural, which is really I embrace these those ones, and everyone says this is a bit like Supernatural, this is a bit like Dresden. It's like, yeah, that's fine. Dresden.
Yeah, I mean, they're not bad things to be compared to, really.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And it's a lot of fun. It's a very, very different world to the world of Howell. So it's a fun one.
No, great. Well, thank you very much, and hopefully catch up with you again soon.
Yeah, thanks very much.